You are scrolling through a fantasy show late at night. A dragon fills the screen, wings the size of a house. You keep watching because some part of you believes it even for a second. But the real answer is far stranger. Dragons never existed. And yet almost every culture on Earth, separated by oceans and thousands of years, drew the exact same monster. China had one. Europe had one. Australia had one. Mesoamerica had one. None of these people ever met. None of them shared a book. None of them had access to the same art, the same trade routes, or even the same language family. So how did they all imagine the same creature? Think about how strange that really is. If dragons were just a random product of imagination, you would expect wild variation. Some cultures might dream up monsters covered in fur. Others might invent something with 100 legs or no legs at all. Instead, the pattern narrows again and again toward the same basic blueprint. A long body, scaled skin, claws built for tearing, often wings, often fire or something like it, often guarding treasure or a river or the underworld itself. That is not the fingerprint of random invention. That is the fingerprint of something shared, something buried deep enough in the human mind that it surfaces the same way no matter where you are standing on the planet. Let's start with what a dragon actually is, stripped of the fire and the crown jewels. A long reptilian body, sharp teeth, claws, often wings, often guarding something. That is not one culture's imagination. That is a pattern. And patterns that repeat across isolated populations usually point to something real underneath them. The first clue comes from the ground itself. Ancient people dug things up long before anyone had a word for paleontology. In the hills of Central Asia, they found massive curved bones and skulls the size of a person, poking out of red sandstone. Historian of science Adrienne Mayer has spent decades tracing these discoveries. Her research shows that many early dragon and griffin legends came directly from fossil beds, places where the bones of protoceratops and other ancient reptiles lay exposed on the surface. Imagine finding a beaked skull with a bony frill, half buried in the desert, with no concept of extinction to explain it. What would you call it? You wouldn't call it a fossil. There was no such category yet. You would call it a monster because a monster was the only box your mind had ready. Mayer's work shows this happened again and again in Greece, in China, in the American Southwest. People found real bones. Then they built real stories around them. The dragon wasn't a lie. It was a hypothesis drawn in myth instead of science. Consider the griffin, a close cousin of the dragon in the ancient imagination. Mayer's research traces griffin legends to the gold mining regions of Central Asia, where nomads regularly encountered the beaked, four-legged skeletons of protoceratops jutting out of the sand. A creature with a bird's beak and a lion's body wasn't a wild leap. It was a reasonable description of what was actually lying on the ground in front of them. Ancient Greek writers recorded these stories secondhand, and later scholars dismissed them as pure fantasy. It took modern paleontology to realize the ancient nomads may have been more careful observers than anyone gave them credit for. The same pattern shows up on the other side of the world. In China, massive fossilized bones were unearthed for centuries and were labeled longu or dragon bones. They weren't discarded as strange rocks. They were treated as genuine evidence of a real animal, catalogued, traded, and even ground into traditional medicine. The Chinese dragon, unlike the fire-breathing villain of European tales, was often a symbol of power and reign rather than pure menace. But the underlying instinct was the same. Something enormous, reptilian, and long-bodied had clearly once walked or slithered across the land. The bones were the evidence. The dragon was the explanation people built to fit them. But fossils only explain part of it. They explain why people believe dragons had existed somewhere in the deep past. They don't explain why the image itself, teeth, claws, a long low body, feels so universally terrifying. For that, you have to look somewhere much older than any myth. You have to look at your own eyes. Psychologist Lynn Isbell has spent years studying a strange fact about human vision. Compared to other primates, humans have unusually sharp visual detail and unusually good depth perception. Isbell's snake detection theory proposes that this sharpened vision evolved specifically to spot one thing fast: snakes. For millions of years, snakes were one of the few predators that could kill a primate silently, from cover, without warning. The primates who spotted them first survived. The ones who didn't get to pass anything on. So your brain built a specialized alarm system. Not a general fear of animals. A specific, fast-triggering fear of long, low, coiled shapes. Studies using infants and young children have shown that snake-like shapes get noticed and reacted to faster than almost any other visual pattern, well before a child has ever been taught to be afraid of one. That fear isn't learned. It's inherited. You can even notice it in your own body right now. Picture a coiled garden hose lying in tall grass. Even reading that sentence, some small part of your attention just sharpened. That isn't imagination. That's a very old subroutine, running quietly in the background of your mind, checking the shape against a template written millions of years before anyone had a word for dragon. Now put both pieces together. Ancient people are digging up enormous reptilian skeletons they cannot explain. At the same time, their brains are already wired with a primal alarm for anything long, scaled, and predatory. The fossil gives the shape. The ancient snake detection circuit gives the fear. The dragon is what happens when those two things meet inside a human imagination that has no better explanation available. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. This didn't happen once. It happened independently, over and over, on continents that had no contact with each other. Anthropologist David E. Jones, in his research on dragon mythology across cultures, documented dragon-like creatures in nearly every corner of the inhabited world, from aboriginal rainbow serpent stories in Australia to serpent gods in Mesoamerica to the great dragons of Chinese cosmology. Jones argued that this wasn't cultural borrowing. It was convergent imagination, built from the same evolutionary fears, triggered by the same categories of predator. Snakes, big cats, birds of prey. A dragon, in his framing, is really a composite predator. Take the fangs of a big cat. Add the coiling body of a snake. Add the wings and talons of a bird of prey. You have built, piece by piece, the single most dangerous animal your ancestors' brains could imagine, all merged into one creature. Is that a coincidence? It doesn't look like one. It looks like a fear compiled by evolution, then decorated by culture. And once you see it that way, the dragon stops being a fantasy invention. It becomes something closer to a fossil of its own. Not a fossil of bone, but a fossil of fear, preserved in story instead of stone. Notice how consistent the role of the dragon is, even when the details shift. In European legend, it guards a hoard of gold, and a hero must slay it to claim what it hides. In Mesopotamian myth, the goddess Tiamat takes the form of a great sea serpent, embodying primordial chaos itself before being defeated to create order in the world. In Hindu and Southeast Asian tradition, serpent deities called Nagas guard water, treasure, and the underworld, feared and respected in equal measure. Different names. Different gods attached to them. The same underlying job description. Something ancient, reptilian, and dangerous standing between people and the thing they want most. Think about what that means. Every dragon carving, every temple mural, every knight versus dragon legend, is really a monument to a threat your ancestors could not afford to ignore. The stories weren't decoration. They were survival information, wrapped in something memorable enough to pass down for 100 generations. A warning that says, be careful of the long, low shape in the grass. Be careful of teeth you cannot see coming. There's one more layer to this that most retellings skip entirely. Composite monsters aren't unique to dragons. Across mythology, the most feared creatures are almost always mashups of the most dangerous real predators a given region actually had. In Africa and parts of Europe, you find creatures blending lion features with serpent features, borrowing the ambush power of a big cat and the silent approach of a snake. In coastal cultures, sea serpents borrow the scale and menace of large predatory fish, stitched onto a snake's long body. Your ancestors weren't inventing danger from nothing. They were compressing every real threat they had ever faced into a single, memorable shape, because a story is easier to pass down than a list of separate warnings about separate animals. That compression is, in a strange way, an early form of education. A single vivid dragon story taught a child more about the dangers of the natural world than a dozen separate lessons about snakes, big cats, and birds of prey ever could. Fear wrapped in narrative sticks. Fear delivered as a checklist does not. Every culture that told dragon stories to its children was, without realizing it, running a very effective survival curriculum. And this is where the ancient truth quietly folds back into your life today. You don't live near saber-toothed cats. You are not digging up dinosaur bones in the desert. But watch your own reactions carefully. A shadow that moves wrong in your peripheral vision. A coiled rope on the floor that makes you flinch before your rational brain catches up. A horror movie villain that is somehow always part reptile, part predator, part something ancient. None of that is random. Your nervous system still runs the same detection software your ancestors built to survive real monsters. You just don't have the monsters anymore. You only have the alarm. So the next time you catch yourself reacting to something before you understand why, pause on it for a second. That flinch, that prickle at the back of your neck, that instinctive step back, it is not irrational. It's inherited. It's the same circuitry that once turned a buried skull into a legend and a rustle in the grass into a warning worth telling your children about. You were scrolling through a fantasy show late at night, watching a dragon fill the screen. But the real dragon was never on the screen at all. It was already sitting behind your eyes, older than any story, waiting for the right shape to remind it what it was built for.